At the same time of cholera outbreak in London, William Farr, who was a statistician and the head of General Register Office of the government department, he was responsible for recording births and death and marriages. His most important contribution to public health was in setting up a system that routinely recorded morbidity and mortality. And he's also considered as the pioneer of medical statistics and demography. So for a while, William Farr was convinced that cholera was transmitted by air. As shown here in this figure, the death rates per 10,000 population and the elevation above the Thames River. So he reasoned that soil at lower elevations, especially near the river banks of the river, contain much organic matter, which produces miasma. So he simulated a calculation based on miasma theory and compared it with the observed mortality, and they produced a very similar result. Coincidentally, to support his belief that cholera was being transmitted by miasma. So as we have gone through throughout the course, it is true that many people have led groundwork in germ theory, but it is actually Pasteur and Koch, which will be introduced in the following slide. That strengthen the germ theory by providing proof in experiments that provide accurate results and findings to support the germ theory. Pasteur proved that the idea of germ theory, and that it was microorganisms that are behind the fermentation of sugar into alcohol and spoiling of milk. Many people at that time believed that living things could arise from non-living things by the action of God in the spontaneous generation theory. So Pasteur was convinced that any growth that appear on maybe food, such as mold, were from microscopic microorganisms that were presented in the air. And he also developed the heat treatment technique called pasteurization, and that could kill microorganisms in milk, for example. He also succeeded in producing 2 major vaccines through attenuation, which is the process in weakening the organism's strength by passing it successively through animals. One was the anthrax vaccine in 1881, and the other was a rabies vaccine in 1885. And due to this germ theory, that there is also an increasing attention in surgery to the role of microorganism in infection. Inseparable link to Pasteur in bacteriology, a causal relationship between causative microbe and disease. Koch proposed a postulate, which is a series of conditions that must be met for a microorganism to be considered a cause of disease. So The postulates are written here in the slides, that the microorganism must be found in the organism suffering from the disease, and that it should not be found in healthy organism. Okay, and also that the microorganism must be isolated from a diseased organism and be able to grow in a pure culture. Also, that the inoculation of this extracted microbe into a susceptible host should produce the same disease. And lastly, the same microbe should be able to be extracted from the infected organism and again grown in that culture. So this is Koch's postulate to confirm that the microorganism is the cause of infectious disease. Majorly influenced by Pasteur and Koch, there was then the golden age of microbiology, and in the following decades, there was a discovery boom of pathogens, of infectious agents. Okay, some examples are, for example, leprosy, malaria, typhoid, tuberculosis, diphtheria, so on and so forth. But important contributions in medical science was majorly by the European scientists. Towards the end of the century, there were also other countries were also entering into the field, such as the US and Japan. For example, Dr. Kitasato, who co-discovered plague in 1894, and Dr. Shiga, who discovered dysentery bacillus in 1898. So in the subsequent decades, scientists also started to recognize the importance of vector. In spite of the new knowledge of disease-causing microorganism, the genesis of many epidemics and the mechanism of transmissions were yet unknown and not clearly understood until the important role of vectors was proposed. The most notable of these transmissions were found to be initially among healthy human carriers. And the second important step was that the identification of carriers of other animal carriers. For example, we could see that mosquitoes were the vectors of yellow fever, dengue, and other examples are as shown here in the in the figure, excuse me. So this discovery of the carrier paved the path for a more effective prevention of disease, even more than the isolation and the understanding of the microbe itself. So due to the discovery and understanding, the mystery of disease specificity was solved, and not the miasma. Okay, and this has led into a more rational prevention and treatment on an unprecedented scale, and marking the major transformation in public health.